Okay, everybody. Well, I'm the last talk of the day, so thanks for sticking around. My name is Blair Reeves. I actually don't have a bio slide up here because I'm a pretty boring guy. There's not much you need to know about me. My session here, I actually changed the name a little bit of my presentation because I think the brochure sounds a little dry. This is really about selling to the major leagues in B2B. And let me tell you a little bit about why I'm the kind of guy to talk about this. So I've never worked for a startup, and I've never worked in Silicon Valley. I kind of wound up in tech in sort of a kind of an untraditional way, but I spent a number of years at IBM. I'm an IBMer. Then I was at Demandware for a number of years, which is now the Salesforce Commerce Cloud, and I'm now at SAS, which is you probably may not have heard of. It's the world's largest privately held software company. A lot of things I can say about IBM, but I can tell you one thing about them is that they sell software. They make $18 billion a quarter selling software. They make numbers in terms of revenue, not in terms of profitability all the time, but in terms of revenue that just make everyone else kind of embarrassed. What I see a lot in the product management area, especially around selling to what they call the enterprise segment, are got a lot of kind of miscomprehensions about how that segment really works and how we sell to it. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. I should also point out that my friend Ben Gaines and I, he's at Adobe Analytics. He's a group product manager there. We came up with a book a little bit earlier on this year about product management in enterprise software. It's not a very large book because it's everything we know about product management. It's about yay big. It came up from O'Reilly. We have a couple of them here. I got them for free. I'm not going to bring them back with me on the plane to North Carolina, so there's a whole bunch of them here if you guys want some. So we'll have those at the cocktail hour, or right back there with Sachin. So that's great. So let me tell you about this first. So the enterprise software segment is dominated by the large players. This is not something that anyone is going to come as a big surprise to anybody, but IBM, Oracle, SAP, Symantec, Microsoft is a huge chunk of the market. Now, if you expand that to 10 different companies, it's a full half of the entire enterprise software segment. Actually, the drop-off between SAP and Symantec is a pretty big one. And from Symantec to number 6, it's pretty big as well. So it's really the big 4, but we just call it big 5 just to be charitable. This is a big player's game. Like I said, they make just a ridiculous amount of money doing this, and it's largely because, not only because they're incumbents, not only because they've been around for a long time, but also because they know how to sell to very large enterprises that are usually not tech companies and usually do not share a lot of the kind of common characteristics of companies that are kind of more fun to sell to. This is not to say that that large companies are better, any better than small companies. It's not really a judgment like that at all. But I think it's actually kind of instructive to think about this as an evolutionary state, because a large company is kind of the logical conclusion of what a small company aspires to be. So much like like our chimps, way back in the day, no worse or anything, but they're nimbler, they're more agile, they can fit in more niches and fit more ecological niches that large organisms can't. But human beings are the most dangerous animal on Earth, and the reason is because we are big, we are strong, we can go into any ecosystem and kind of transform it for our own purposes, and we can use tools in ways that chimps really can't. And the same principle kind of applies in a lot of ways to a Microsoft or an IBM or an Oracle moving into your segment. Startups and smaller companies can certainly find a niche, can certainly find opportunities there that a large company cannot. But a large company also has resources and frankly, a sales wherewithal that a lot of smaller companies don't. So let's talk a little bit about how large companies make decisions, because I think this is actually going to be kind of the basis for how they choose a vendor and how they choose what kind of software to buy. So in a very large company, there's a couple of different ways which they make the decision on how to choose a software vendor. The ideal situation for any enterprise vendor, whether you're small, medium-sized, or large, is that it's driven by a practitioner group. So this is very common in marketing technology, in a lot of kind of like emerging technology areas. There might be a practitioner group, a number of users within that organization who are tasked with finding a vendor, choosing a vendor, or choosing a particular tool to use. In the last several years, we've heard, I've worked a lot in marketing technology. That's where I am now. And we've heard a lot about how the chief marketing officers, CMOs, are going to be the drivers of the most enterprise, or the fastest growing drivers of enterprise software spend for the next 10 years. And to a certain extent, we've seen that. But for the most part, it's like the VP and director level people in a practitioner group who are driving a vendor choice. But far more often the case, it's really the IT department, or even something like the procurement department, or a search or RFP committee. And how many of you have ever been through RFP cycles, right? So some of us here, they're a huge pain in the ass, and everyone knows that, right? And RFP cycles are really designed in a lot of ways to filter out small companies, because the way you come up with an RFP is you go to every different department in the company, and you ask what's on your wish list, and you add it to a list, and then that's your RFP. And of course, what that does is systematically creates a product which isn't necessarily great in terms of user delight, but it checks all the boxes, and it meets all the needs of that large company. And much like the human versus chimp example, the human has a much broader set of needs. They have a much broader set of activities that they participate in. Again, it's not really a better or worse kind of situation, but a large company does have actual needs that it has to fulfill that a smaller company doesn't. And some of those do go back to things like audit and regulatory, which I'm going to get to in just a second. A lot of the influencers to that vendor choice then come down to pretty typical stuff like personal relationships and brand power. So, for example, if you've ever worked in digital marketing software, almost no matter where in digital marketing you've worked, at some point or another you have been compared to Google Analytics, right? And Google Analytics is a great product, don't get me wrong, but it is completely inappropriate for a large company that has actual needs for its online marketing. But nevertheless, we are all compared to Google Analytics because they're Google, right? And they have a brand power that basically eclipses anybody else's in the market. And the brand power is kind of inescapable. Personal relationships are, of course, a whole sales thing. You really can never get away from them. But then also the RFP requirements I talked about before are key. The secret power that all the big five have there is that they've already written your RFP. The rule for the case at IBM, and I suspect the same is true at Microsoft or Oracle, is that if we didn't have an influence on the RFP, if we didn't write the RFP, we didn't even compete in a sales cycle, right? Because we knew that why bother, right? And the reality is you can break out of the RFP cycle in certain cases, in certain deals, but most of the time the RFP is driven by again those audit and regulatory compliance cycles that I talked about before, and checking boxes from every different part of the company. At the point where you're competing in a solution space where the technology and the need is known well enough to have boxes to check, that's already a place where you are systematically going to find a very difficult entry into that market. I want to talk about distribution for a second. So what does distribution in a large organization look like? There are two ways you can distribute your product within a large organization. You can do it yourself, which looks a lot like this, because large organizations hold the keys to the kingdom. They don't want a non-approved, non-controllable product proliferating in their environment. There are companies that do this, and I actually took out a slide in my presentation here about providing a disclaimer about Slack. Slack has managed to do this, right? And they've managed to distribute their product pretty effectively across very large organizations, almost ubiquitously now. So it can be done. The problem is that distributing your product without the help of your customer company requires you burn a mountain of cash in marketing. And that is essentially what Slack is doing right now, is burning a mountain of venture capital cash to eke out growth, but they're still not profitable, and they are clinging to number 3 in terms of market share against very entrenched competitors like Microsoft Teams and Confluence and even Skype, right? And I'm going to return to that point just a little bit here. I love Skype. I think they're a great company. I love Slack. I don't love Skype. I think they're a great company. And so the key is to get distribution inside a large organization really requires you get a cooperation and you get the company themselves to do it. So how do you get a company to distribute your product for you? Well, it's a matter of a commitment that that company makes to you and that you make to the company. And the way you do that as a smaller company that may not be as well known as an IBM or Oracle, of course, is through the tried and true method of a POC, a pilot, and an early adopter program, which no one wants to do because companies don't like to pay for those. And of course, you should never ever do a free POC or a free pilot because it sucks up your resources and it costs you a lot of money and time, and then you have no real commitment to it. So let's talk about paid POCs for a second here. And this might be a little bit dry here, but this is a large part of was a large part of my life at one point or another. A couple key things to keep in mind for a paid POC. If a company is pushing you to not pay for a proof of concept or a pilot program or early adopter program, they want to do it for free, I would push back on that. And I can't really think of a case where I would do a free POC unless they were some sort of lighthouse customer that you really couldn't do without and you had the resources to do that. Assuming that they will pay for your proof of concept or pilot program, though, a finite timeline of 6 to 3 months is completely sufficient to prove the value of your product. Focusing on a small specific team with a specific stakeholder within the organization who you can work with, who is receptive to you, and who understands the value of the problem that you're trying to solve. Concrete KPIs. So it usually goes down to Bill and IT. And Bill and IT and his feelings are kind of like, I kind of like Acme Co. They're nice. That's not going to get you sold inside of any kind of organization that I've ever dealt with. So if you can distill this into some sort of quantifiable KPI, even if you have to really kind of stretch it out, that's absolutely critical. And then of course all the normal kind of like customer success and support stuff. So they have to have a throat to choke, as the saying goes. They have to have a contact person, a success person that is invested in making sure their company is successful in your pilot or your POC. If you can check all these boxes here, then your chances of having a really successful pilot program are going to be way, way, way better. And frankly, once you've become ingratiated in an organization like this and built a number of stakeholders, your chances of landing a paid customer are much higher. So paying for distribution is really tough because companies pay for what they value, and if you don't value, they can't value something you don't understand. So I want to talk about 3 different kinds of problems that large companies face. And really, I think these are kind of applicable to smaller companies or mid-sized companies as well. But this is, my focus is on kind of very, very large companies. And their sorts of problems never really change. The first problem is problems they understand. Right? So these are tried and true problems that have been around since forever and that the solutions to which are really well known. So examples of these are going to be email, data storage, security, stuff that people have been dealing with for 10, 20, 30, 40, or plus years. The technology changes in those, and I'm going to get back to that point in just a minute here, but problems they understand are where you're going to find the most entrenched sort of competitors. The problems they don't understand. And this is where we all would like to think we are, and places where most of the opportunity is. But your customer's perception of the problems they don't understand may vary a little bit. And I'm going to get back to this in just a second. And the problems they may not really have. And this comes up far more often than you would think. This is like 99% of like your blockchain applications, right? Like companies that say they need a hybrid cloud blockchain bullshit like app for whatever, right? And there's almost no reason they ever need this sort of thing. 90% of the GDPR freakouts that we dealt with earlier on this year were from companies or customers who weren't really affected or didn't really have that kind of issue. It's something they heard about in the news, and there are a whole lot of executives out there. These usually don't come from your like hardcore IT users. They come from executives who are, it's just not their area of competence or their area of interest to really understand this stuff, and they send an email and someone has to follow up on it. So I'll talk about these 3. So problems they understand. This is why Skype exists, right? This is why, an example I like to use, are any other IBMers in the room here? So again, I left the company a number of years ago, but I use Lotus Notes, right? Lotus Notes is the classic example of this. And guess what? Lotus Notes is still a 1 billion, with a B, business for IBM. They make a buttload of money off of that terrible piece of software. And the reason is because it checks all the boxes, right? It checks audits box. It checks the regulatory box. It's a hardened, reliable, secure database, distributed database program with like an email client sit on top of it. And it's awful, but look, it works, and there are, UPS runs on it. Large parts of the US government run on it. Other governments run on it. It is a completely integral part of many, many, many companies' IT infrastructure. And the reason is because it's a problem that most companies understand, right? And trying to convince them of the value of doing iterating on that or changing their approach to those kinds of problems can be really, really hard. Again, this is the problem for a company like Slack. So everyone loves Slack, but again, the problem is that your buyer of the software, it doesn't check any of their boxes. We fix this problem. We have Confluence. We fix this problem. We have IRC or Skype or whatever. And even if the users like it, it doesn't check any of the buyer's boxes to pay a lot of money for a new solution to that. Or in the cases where overwhelming user popularity does drive a company to experiment with paying for Slack, their willingness to pay is fairly low, and that is why Microsoft Teams doesn't have the pressure to go to bonkers growth or bonkers profitability that like a Slack does. And so again, I think Slack's a great product, but I think it'll be permanently a 3 or 4 market share player. So the problems you understand. Buyers always trump users because this is a problem. You're never going to convince the company that what they're doing is wrong or how they're doing it is wrong, and that you provide a better solution. These tend to be broadly applicable problems, so they're very cross-industry, across different verticals, and your competition is really, really tough. These are entrenched competitors who've been there forever. These are the Oracles and IBMs and Microsofts of the world, and breaking out of this category is really, really tough. So the best approach to this is, again, buyer-focused strategy. Go for the boring stuff that administrative users and buyers love to check boxes on. Logging, security, audit, customization, all this stuff, which is really a pain to build, but which large enterprise users absolutely demand. Stuff like UX, glossy design, are probably less important only because user experience and user delight is just not going to move the needle. So the second problem here is the problems that your customer doesn't really understand. And this is the really more exciting kind of category, because this is the kind of stuff where we have new markets we want to move into, or there are new technologies we want to take advantage of, or we have all these assets, we're not really sure how to take advantage of them, right? So I have all these on-premise workloads. I want to put them in the cloud, save some money. I'm not sure how, or I'm not sure, in what the process is to do that, what steps we take to do that. I want to reach new customers. I want internationalization. I want to internationalize my business in different markets, different countries in the world. There are a million different examples of this. If you have a really valuable product in this kind of case, then this is the really exciting category for you. Framing the problem from the get out is the most important step of addressing a problem like this. So some of the most interesting companies that have kind of gotten really big in the last decade or 2 decades have claimed a problem like this and framed it in a very novel way. So you think about like a Salesforce, right? CRM is not new. It's been around forever. But what Salesforce was able to do is they were able to frame the problem of customer relationship management with a new technology and frame this problem as a way to help companies grow in a new way using new technology and apply this to different parts of their business. Same thing with MuleSoft, right? So making different parts of your company or different parts of your IT infrastructure or software talk to one another. Very old problem, very well understood, and kind of a huge hornet's nest. And MuleSoft, had a new approach to that problem and framed it in a very different way that made it into, an entrenched point of view. Companies spend millions, billions of dollars trying to establish a point of view around this. And a good example of this is Adobe. Adobe is my favorite example because I think that they are the single best company in the enterprise SaaS market today in terms of telling a story. If you can tell a story around your product and what you're trying to do in your solution area, and you have successful companies who can validate that story and kind of back it up, and you can stick to that, you make it into a brand, you create internal recognition around other people in your company, it makes you into an incredibly powerful juggernaut. Now, the way we talk about CRM today is Salesforce's story. And the way we talk about digital marketing and creative software is Adobe's story. IBM tried this. When I was there, we tried Smarter Planet, smarter marketing, smarter this, smarter that, smarter. And we were not very successful. And it cost the company a lot of money. But making its own market like that was the right approach. And this makes you the incumbent. If you're able to entrench your point of view in a company like this, if you can entrench a story and a point of view around something like customer data platforms or around encrypted data storage or communications, then that's very powerful. And that is actually what Slack is trying to do, which I think is the right move. So the best approaches for problems that your customer doesn't necessarily understand is storytelling. It's backing that story with quantitative as well as qualitative examples, anecdotes, case studies, and so forth. Building a strong point of view around that solution area. I'm not really sure how you create a point of view around customer data management, but I'm sure there's a way, and people are doing it, and people are very successful at doing it. What doesn't really work very well are comparisons with other products, because the moment you get into a feature bake-off with a competitor around your solution area, you're implicitly admitting that you kind of do the same thing. This is a known problem to you, and now we're just in a tit for tat. So it doesn't work very well. So the third problem that I want to talk about here are problems that your customer doesn't necessarily have. This is meant to be a little tongue-in-cheek because it's the very last presentation of the day, but it's also completely real. This happens all the time. Again, most of the companies who came to us around GDPR concerns, or every company looking for, there's a company right now doing blockchain inventory management for produce, right? And I'm not an inventory management guy. Maybe it makes sense, but I'm pretty sure it's stupid, right? Because it's some executive who got a thought leader in his ear or whatever, and got a bug up his ass and started trying to buy software to address a problem like this. And this is everywhere. I assume most of you are familiar with the HIPPO acronym, the highest paid person's opinion. This is absolutely a thing everywhere in IT. And if your CEO, CTO, CMO, whoever decides that we really need to look into this blockchain thing, that's going to be your quarter, right? So the problems your customer probably doesn't really have, there are a couple of ways I like to approach it. First, what are you trying to understand what they're actually trying to solve, right? So GDPR example is illustrative about this. In the GDPR example, customers are actually anxious about privacy. They're anxious about regulatory decisions coming down. They're unclear about how the laws are changing, how the law affects them, these sorts of things. And those are really educational opportunities for you as a vendor. You might be wrong, right? You might actually be, this customer probably knows their business really well, and they might know something about their business that you don't that makes this problem actually pretty applicable to what they do. I don't like being super, I don't want to be super arrogant and assume that I know their business better than they do. So it may very well be that your customer actually does have a problem you don't understand. Assuming those are not the case, though, this is the case where you want to proceed with caution, because at the point where you have established that you understand their problem, that you definitely know that whatever solution area that they're looking at is not applicable to their problem, then you probably don't want to sell them software because that's dishonest and dissembling, and it will eventually get you in trouble when the customer actually understands what's going on and realizes he's paid you $1 million for software he's never going to use. So the best approach here is to focus on your buyer, to listen, to understand, to educate. To the extent that educating your user can help you establish that frame and help you establish that point of view, you can convert this into a problem your customer doesn't understand. If you can help them understand that problem and help them understand why your product can actually solve this problem over here that you actually have instead of this problem over here, well, that can create enormous value for that customer and make them love you. On the other hand, it may help them understand that the problem that they thought they had is not the one they really have, and that also creates goodwill. You also want to avoid a feature bake-off or a quick sale. Don't sell them software they don't need because that never really works. I'm running out of time. My name is Blair Reeves. I've got a bunch of books back there. I'm happy to talk about it. And questions? Last talk of the day, guys. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a very good point. So one thing you always want to do is, of course, if you understand that there's an incumbent vendor at the company, you can often kind of tell which vendor has helped them write the RFP. It's pretty rare. It does happen, but it's fairly rare that, especially with non-tech companies, older companies that are not super savvy, that they've written that RFP themselves. So there's a whole class of consultants out there. Some idiot at McKinsey or Accenture or whatever gave them an RFP they control V'd into a Excel somewhere that they've used at a dozen others. Or alternatively, if at Oracle, IBM, Microsoft is the incumbent, maybe they have basically written that RFP. There's sometimes ways you can kind of tease that out, and if you really understand your market segment very well, there's often ways you can kind of guess who's kind of had input into this, because that can help you understand kind of what solution area they already have, what kind of solution areas they've been working on before. Certainly, RFPs can give you great intel about what a customer individually and their customer segment generally cares about, because it's sort of like a Forrester wave or something like that, like the big questionnaires you get. If they have obviously like 25 different questions on event types or whatever is the solution, the particular feature set that's relevant in your solution space, then of course that's kind of a signal that like this is the thing they've thought a lot about. In other cases, they may have like two questions like, do you support single sign-on? Yes. Do you support? Are you GDPR compliant? Even though that doesn't make any sense. Yes. Right. In which case, a pretty good signal that they may not have really thought through it too much. I don't worry about it too much when we say we don't do something, right? Because it's rare that any company is going to say we do everything on your RFP perfectly, and if they do, they're lying. And sometimes the customer will understand that. Oftentimes, they'll kind of like guess it. What you'll find is a lot of large organizations that have had relationships with those big five vendors for a long time hate them. They don't trust them. They don't like them. They think they snake oil. But they keep using them because they have no choice, or they feel they have no choice. So a good way to establish credibility is to kind of use RFP as a jumping off point into discussing and doing some more of that educating, setting the frame around a problem set. I've seen some success at using that. You want to go left and then a right, though. So, anybody else? All right. Yes. So that's interesting. So it's funny. I just listened to Doug Landis' talk over there, and he was talking about the Box partnership with IBM, which they announced a great fanfare, and then IBM just didn't sell anything because the Box product cost zero, right, or cost next to zero, and so no IBM seller wants to sell that, right? As a product manager myself, I would never count on a partner to distribute my product. I've never seen that to be super helpful. I just don't trust them. I mean, so there's resellers, there's channel partners. That's a little bit different, especially if you have an internationalization strategy or something like that. And they're, certainly like if you're very large, Accenture, Deloitte, or whoever, they're effectively reselling your product through their engagements with different partners. That's usually only very applicable if you're one of the big five, right? If you're a smaller company, That's rarely going to be a really effective way you get in there. So as a product manager, I would never, I wouldn't say, I hate to say never, but I would rarely kind of think about the partner channel when I'm designing features or designing a distribution strategy for the product. Okay, well, book's back there. I'll come back there, and I'm happy to talk. And but I'm staying between you guys and cocktails, so I understand the deal. So thanks.